Hey kids, ready to read with me today? It's time for chapter 7 of Miss Osborne the Mop. Let's find out what happened with that shot, shall we? Hey, watch out, shouted Dill. The mop squealed and began to jump up and down. Jody was so fascinated by this peculiar sight that she did nothing at all. Whoever was in the bushes yelled, "Low down, good-for-nothing varmints, now get!" And the gun sounded again. "Mr. Poteet, Mr. Poteet," shrieked Dill. "Quit shooting, it's me, Dill Tracy." There was a great rustling in the bushes, and then an old man, ragged and dirty, carrying a shotgun and accompanied by a skinny and melancholy hound dog, stepped out of the laurel and arrowwood. From under a battered, old wide-brimmed hat, he peered this way and that, and finally pointed a finger toward Jody. "That you, young'un?" he asked. "Boy, is that you?" You see that picture? "Here I am, Mr. Poteet," Dill answered, moving forward. "That's my cousin, Jody Ransom, over there, and we've got a lady with us, Miss Mop." The old man leaned in the Mop's direction, swinging his head and shoulders up and down like a big, ragged bear. "What?" he asked, staring nearsighted around. "Where's she at?" "Right there beside Jody," Dill said. "She's visiting. She isn't very well. We thought the air up here might be good for her." The old man walked right up to Jody and then swept a hat from his head. "How do, ma'am," he said politely. "I'm proud to make your acquaintance. It ain't often I get to see a lady in these parts." The Mop drew herself up into her usual posture of offended dignity. "Well, that's small wonder if you're going to shoot at people continually," she said tartly. "Well, if I'd known it was you, I wouldn't have shot," the old man answered in a hurt tone. "I weren't after you. I was after them no-good Hadley boys. They knowed I was setting out for Wolftown, and they aimed to come wreck my place whilst I'm gone." He glared all around with a specially fierce glare for a couple of suspicious-looking bushes. "I don't think you heard the Hadley boys," Dill soothed him. "It was just us. We haven't seen or heard another person on the trail." "That right?" asked Mr. Poteet. "Well, don't pay no attention to old Betsy here anyways. Her bark's worse than her bite. Fact is, they ain't no lead in her, just powder. Down to the hardware store, they won't sell me no shot. Claim I can't see too good. Darn foolish. I can see a fly's eye at 50 paces. But Jody could tell it wasn't so. The old man obviously had some sort of eye trouble, and he could barely make out his hand before his face. No wonder Dill wasn't afraid to introduce the Mop to him. "But I wouldn't never shoot at a lady," the old man assured the Mop, "particular not one as weren't feeling too pert." He stared at her earnestly. "You do look puny. You ain't got much flesh on you for a fact, and you ain't had a good color. Likely you got a bad heart." The Mop began to languish at once. She turned to Jody and said faintly, "I am simply not strong at all." "I wouldn't be surprised to find that I have a weak heart. I came to the mountains in the hope of the pure and invigorating air would help me." "Why, it's the truth," cried Mr. Poteet. "A little rest up here in the hills will do you a world of good. This here air is the healthiest air in creation. I just breathe it in big gulp night and morning, and it's such good, pure air, I don't hardly have to worry about doing any breathing in between. It's all the medicine a body needs, except maybe a little yarb tonic once in a while. I make a fine yarb tonic myself. Left a big new-made jar of it on my house just this morning. If I was to home, I'd give you a dose or two. It's a famous remedy." Dill made a face. He'd had a taste of Mr. Poteet's herb tonic. Mr. Poteet was reluctant to let a patient slide through his fingers. "I'm heading down to Wolftown to see my brother and sister," he told the Mop. "I won't be gone but a day or two. You come by and see me the first of next week, and I'll give you some tonic." "How kind of you," answered the Mop. "It is nice to feel that someone appreciates my delicate state of health. After all these children, sometimes I don't believe." Her voice trailed off weakly. "Oh, now, ma'am, you got nothing to worry about," cried Mr. Poteet. "I promise you a few days up here and a couple of spoonfuls of my tonic, and you'll be right as rain. I take my oath on it. Where'll you be staying?" The Mop looked questioningly at Dill. Dill looked up at the sky and craned his neck. "Isn't that a hawk over there?" he asked in a terribly interested voice. Mr. Poteet rolled a crafty eye first at Dill and then at the Mop. "Tell you what," he said slowly. "How come you don't stay at my place? I ain't fixin' to be there. It's a real nice place, and you could have it all to yourself. And you could have the tonic. It's sitting on the back of the stove, a big jarful. If'n you was there to look after my hens and make sure the Hadley boys don't bust things up, why then I could visit a mite longer with my brother down in Wolftown." "How much?" asked Dill, who was well acquainted with Mr. Poteet. "Quarter," answered the old man promptly, "and quarter for the tonic." "It's a deal," said Dill, looking relieved. How long will you be gone?" "Oh, 2-3 days," Mr. Poteet said vaguely. "Or not so long. A month, most likely. I'll be getting on now." "Won't you need to go back to your house and pack?" asked Jody. She wondered what kind of a house he had. "Pack what?" asked Mr. Poteet, squinting at her. "Well, you know, your clothes and all," Jody exclaimed. Mr. Poteet looked puzzled. "I'm a-wearing my clothes," he said finally. And then he started down the path, trailed by the hound and using the shotgun as a sort of cane to feel for obstacles. "Will he be all right?" asked Jody worriedly. "Sure," Dill answered. "He walks this trail a couple of times a week." Now the Mop spoke up. "A mountain cabin certainly sounds peaceful and quaint and restful," she said. "But will it be safe? Suppose the Hadley boys do come around?" "We'll stay with you in the daytime," Jody comforted her. "I'm sure you'll be all right." But secretly she was a little anxious herself. The Hadley boys sounded dangerous. She didn't know what they would do if anybody tried to tear up the place. "You don't have to worry. The Hadley boys moved away from the mountain about 10 years ago," Dill told them. "Mr. Poteet just uses them as an excuse when he wants to start shooting and stirring up a little excitement. Nobody but him lives up here, and once in a while he gets lonesome. He sort of makes up a feud with the Hadley boys to keep himself company." "Oh, well then," said the Mop, "I shall be quite pleased to help Mr. Poteet out by staying at his place and feeding his hens. A fine old gentleman and a most understanding person. How sad that he appears to be losing his sight." "Is it far to his house?" "Not much farther," replied Dill. "About half an hour's walk. The path just keeps on going to his house, and then it mostly stops. Hardly anybody comes up here, and he's almost at the top of the mountain." "The top of the mountain? How wonderful that sounds!" cried the Mop, and she trotted on ahead, looking eagerly from side to side of the trail. "Is Mr. Poteet's cabin nice?" asked Jody in a low voice. "Well, it's better than the shack," Dill answered. "It doesn't leak anyway. At least not awful, but she'll have to stay there. We promised Mr. Poteet. The hens, remember?" That had been a smart move, Jody had to admit. "Now just look!" cried the Mop, bending perilously down and peering at a little clump of flowers by the edge of the path. Dill and Jody looked. The flowers were dark green, spotted and streaked with white. Jody had often seen these curious blooms before, but she hadn't thought to ask anybody what they were. "That's double your money back," explained the Mop now. "That's the common name, of course. I can't recall the scientific name at the moment. An unusual profusion of blooms. For this section of the country, of course," she added. Jill nudged Jody, and Jody said, "Ouch!" If they didn't hurry up and get rid of the Mop, Jody's ribs were going to be completely mangled. "Oh, how wonderful it is," she murmured, as once more the Mop scurried ahead of them. that the mop knows the names of some things, like robins and rhododendrons, but other things she has these made-up names for. Fruit frosted cupcake? She said scornfully. What it is, see, exclaimed Dill. She's supposed to know lots, like your Miss Osborne does. But really, she just knows what you know, Jody, and you're awfully ignorant. So when she comes to something she don't know, she has to make it up out of things she sort of seeped into her when she was in the pantry or the grocery store or someplace else, see? I am not ignorant, said Jody hotly. But she supposed Dill must be right, especially after what happened at the spring where they stopped to drink the cold water. At least Dill and Jody drank. The mop amused herself by poking at an old, half-rotted, fungus-covered log. Suddenly, she gave a little yelp. The children turned to look. A big piece of bark had slipped from the log, and there in the middle of the decayed wood, among the bewildered beetles and sow-bugs, sat a small, glistening, black and gold-spotted creature with a long tail and 4 stubby legs. Its head was lifted high, and they could see its shiny, smooth-skinned throat pulsing in and out with surprise and fear. Is it a lizard? Asked Jody. Nah, said Dill, who spent so much time clambering over rocks and logs that he was well acquainted with lizards. It's real different from a lizard. It's some kind of something else. Of course it's something else, said the mop in her brisk teacher voice. It's an inner sill, a gold inner sill. Oh, said Dill, looking a little confused. I wonder what it eats under there. Dead wood? The salamander lifted a cautious foot and began to crawl slowly around the log. It eats ingredients, the mop told him. Active and inert ingredients, and beetles. Dill lifted the bark carefully back over the log to shelter the little creature. He didn't dare look at Jody. He knew if he did, they'd both burst out laughing. The path wound on up the mountainside. The trees were more scattered, but the laurel and rhododendron were taller and thicker than ever. Look yonder. Can you see Mr. Poteet's house? Said Dill, pointing. Jody and the mop glanced up at the little peaked gray shingled roof poking up out of the dark green shrubbery. It really did look quaint and peaceful and pretty. Jody began to feel better. As long as the mop had to be more or less imprisoned up here on the mountaintop, Jody wanted her to have a pleasant place to stay. But when they came closer, they saw that around Mr. Poteet's house, the laurel and rhododendron had been cleared away for a good space. Oh, that was unfortunate, Jody thought. It gave you time to get the full effect before you even got there. They all stopped short, staring. Oh, my goodness, said the mop in disbelieving tones. Oh, my goodness gracious! Chapter 8. What do you think they saw? See you soon.